part of the reason that Islam has its backup with regards to the West to such a degree. I mean, there's many reasons, and not all of them are valid, that's for sure. But one of the reasons is that, you know, they being still grounded in a dream, let's say, they can see that the rootless, questioning mind of the West poses a tremendous danger to the integrity of their culture. Now, and it does. I mean, Westerners, us, we undermine ourselves all the time with our searching intellect, and I'm not complaining about that. You know, I mean, there isn't anything easy that can be done about it, but it's still a sort of fruitful catastrophe, and you know, it has real effects on people's lives. It's not some abstract thing.
The question really is Islam scared of the West, or is the West scared of Islam?
Yeah.
Because when I read that, I think Islam is scared of the West, I laughed out loud.
Yeah.
I was like, no, mate. Yeah. You know, it's not Muslim countries that have waged, you know, war repeatedly in Western countries in the last 20 years.
Yeah, or even historically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's take a look at another clip. This is more of a it's a modern clip of what's happened in foreign policy in the last 20 years.
But this was like 2000 and... Oh, no, yeah, no, he'll explain it, won't he?
He'll explain it, yeah.
So this was like 2014 or something, or maybe even before that. Maybe like 2007.
This is General Wesley Clark. This is one of the top United States generals.
Yeah.
And he's going to talk about the attitude...
How scared Islam is of the West.
How scared Islam is of the West, or how scared the West was of Islam, especially, you know, at this point in history, and probably still.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?"
2001. Yeah.
He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you."
I'm sorry.
Right, stop it. So yeah, actually go through the countries again.
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran. So
okay, stop there. They're all Muslim countries.
Yeah.
You know, they're all Muslim countries.
Yeah.
You know, so they basically saw an opportunity to respond to 9/11 as an opportunity to wage war on 7 Muslim countries,
and plans were already in the works for this. And
they figured they could accelerate it.
Which is
obviously,
known.
now this is not we're not here to talk politics.
Yeah,
but it's here to illustrate a point, isn't it? Which is that is Islam scared of the West, or is the West really scared of Islam? Because in the last 20 years, we've had Afghanistan. I mean, we all know what's just happened in Afghanistan. The completely failed exploit there, and the Taliban have taken over again. We've had Iraq. We've had Libya turned into a completely failed state with even open slave markets, right? Because of the complete deposition of its ruler and the creation of an ungoverned space, which has led to complete chaos there. And then we've had a covert war waged against, Syria, and the Syrian government, which has plenty of ills of its own, no doubt about that.
It's known that the West has been, it's public knowledge, has been sponsoring the resistance against the Syrian government. So there's also Syria, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, the Free Syrian Army and things like that. So, the question has to be, is it the West that is really, is it Islam that's scared of the West, or the West that's scared of Islam? Because it seems like the West is scared of Islam.
Well, I mean, yeah, they're constantly bombing them, constantly bombing Muslim countries and invading them and exploiting them in various ways, and have supported the Saudi government for many, many, many decades and have propped that up. We know it's a matter of public knowledge, for instance, when they had a reformer in Iran, when Mossadegh, who was a democratically elected kind of, peaceful prime minister president, he was overthrown. Again,
when he wanted to nationalize the oil,
when
he wanted to nationalize the oil
it's
reserves.
been admitted by intelligence agencies.
Yeah, it came out in, declassified papers, I think 2-3 years ago from the CIA. And this actually comes through really interestingly. It's a question as to why is the West scared of Islam? And it really comes through really nicely in this book called The 100 by Michael H. Hart. So he's a historian, and he made a book which is the 100 most influential human beings in history, a ranking of them, and he put as number one the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Okay, and this is part of the reason he did so. He's not a Muslim, in fact. Well, you can look up Michael H. Hart and see what kind of things he's into and how he's seen yourself, but he's definitely not in favor of a kind of supporting the Muslim narrative.
He's not a supporter of multiculturalism.
He's not a supporter of multiculturalism, let's put it like that. And, so this is what he writes in his book, in the chapter on the Prophet Muhammad, which he gives as a number one, the most influential human being in human history. And he writes this. He says, for instance, so he says, it is far different with the conquest of the Arabs. He contrasts it with the Christian conquest. He says, from Iraq to Morocco, there extends a whole chain of Arab nations united not merely by their faith in Islam, but also by their Arabic language, history, and culture. The centrality of the Quran in the Muslim religion and the fact that it is written in Arabic have probably prevented the Arabic language from breaking up into mutually unintelligible dialects, etc., etc. Differences and divisions between these Arab states exist, of course, and they are considerable, but the partial disunity should not blind us to the important elements of unity that have continued to exist. For instance, very important example he gives. Did I make that clear?
That was very emphatic, yeah.
For instance, neither Iran nor Indonesia, both oil-producing states and both Islamic in religion, joined in the oil embargo of the winter of 1973 to 1974. It is no coincidence that all of the Arab states and only the Arab states participated in the embargo. We see then that the Arab conquests of the 7th century have continued to play an important role in human history down to the present day. It is this unparalleled combination of secular and religious influence which I feel entitles Muhammad, peace be on him, to be considered the most single influential figure in human history. He cites the 1973 OPEC crisis, and that's a really important turning point because I think in the modern day context, the West has, to a large extent, been terrified of Muslims since the Battle of Tours in the 7th century, right, when the Muslims came all the way up to France, basically. Okay, and since then, cultural depictions of Muslims as the barbarian horde. Fine, okay, I get it. In the modern day context,
and the Crusades,
yeah, exactly. But in the modern day context, the West has been particularly terrified of the power of the Muslim nations and of Muslim unity because of the fact that Muslims are sitting on some of the largest reserves of energy on Earth.
Yeah, and if united, there would be
unstoppable political bloc. And so they have to, and that's from the OPEC oil crisis. If we can just turn to a video on the OPEC oil crisis, just to inform our viewers a little better. So this is Crash Course World History.
Shout out to Crash Course. They're a really struggling channel, and they need some help. Yeah. So please click on them.
Yeah, go for it.
Bankruptcy. In addition to these long-term structural changes to the American economy and our demographics, the 1970s saw two oil shocks that sent the economy into a tailspin. In 1973, in response to Western support of Israel, Middle Eastern Arab states suspended oil exports to the U.S., which led to the price of oil quadrupling. This resulted in long lines for gasoline, dramatically higher oil prices, and Americans deciding to purchase smaller, more fuel-efficient cars, which is to say Japanese cars. Also, prices of everything else went up because oil is either used for the production of or transportation of just about everything. I mean, with 70s inflation, this 90-cent portrait of Gerald Ford would have cost at least $1.10. The paint that covers the green parts of not America? Oil-based. The plastic that comprises the DVDs of Crash Course World History, available now at dftba.com, oil-based. Those are a fantastic bargain, and they would have been way more expensive if the price of oil was higher. And then, in 1979, a second oil shock hit the United States after the Iranian Revolution. Wait, Stan, did you say 1979? We got to put up a picture of Jimmy Carter. Bam!
That's enough. Yeah. So the point he makes is good. I mean, he makes a very solid point, which is basically that OPEC oil crisis was when I think the West realized we really need to keep these Muslims from coming together.
But thought experiment.
I think there is a deeper ideological threat because in so many ways, Islam poses a serious threat to some of the developing attitudes, specifically around freedom, right, that are being pushed in the West today.